Friday, I think it's March 18th. Got an old agenda here, or the wrong date on it. Anyway, let's see. First thing we're going to do, we got bill introductions. Senator Hawk. I'm not Hawk, I mean Holland. It's Friday. Go ahead, Senator Holland.
Chairman Solentrop, Chairman Olson, the members of the committee. State Senator Tom Holland, 3rd District. I have 2 bill introductions today, Mr. Chairman, for the committee.
Let's do one at a time.
Very good.
Give us RS and
The first number is RS number 22 RS 3790. This is the Free State 4 Senate redistricting map.
okay. Any questions or comments on it? Any objections? Not seeing any, it's introduced. Go ahead and give us your next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next number is RS number 22 RS 3791. This is the Senate redistricting map called Free State 5. This is also the amendment that was considered during General Orders 2 days ago.
Any questions? Any objections? It's introduced. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Further bill introductions. Do we have any? Not seeing any? Okay. We'll move on. We're going to wait on 560. We're going to do House Bill 2462 first. Jason, why don't you give us an overview? We'll go ahead and open the hearing on 2462.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Real briefly, House Bill 2462 amends a statute regarding membership of the Joint Committee of State Tribal Relations. This is a statutory joint committee that's primarily charged with reviewing and making recommendations on gaming compacts between the governor and the Native American tribes in this state. The membership of the joint committee is currently restricted to those members of the legislature who are appointed to the standing committees on federal and state affairs, judiciary, and taxation in either chamber. House Bill 2462 would remove that restriction, thus allowing any member of the legislature to be appointed to the joint committee by the appointing authorities. This did pass in the House by a vote of 118 to nothing and would go into effect on July 1st of this year. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Jason? Not seeing any. Okay, we'll move on to the proponents. Representative Haswood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand today in proponent for HB 2462. So last year, there is a requirement in current statute that you have to be on the selected committees on the House side, Fed and State Judiciary and Taxation, on the Senate side, Assessment and Taxation. And in statute, you have to be on these committees in order to serve on the Joint Committee of State and Tribal Relations. I'm a freshman, and I didn't know about this rule until last year, where we had to temporarily remove somebody off the committee for myself and my colleague to join this annual meeting, and we would just like to have this removed. It smooths over the process so we can have this meeting. I'm sure that this had great intentions back in the day. To my knowledge, the Joint Committee of State and Tribal Relations was formed for the casino gaming compacts. And back in the day, I think these types of committees had more hands-on interaction prior to this formation of this committee. And so when we move forward into legislation, into the legislature, we would like this process to be smooth over. And I'll stand for questions.
Okay, we'll hold questions till the end. Representative Byers? She not here? We'll move hers to written testimony. Okay, we got virtual Representative Dr. Ponca, Vickers, Kozas.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for allowing me to testify online. I have to take my daughter later today to get her shots. So that's why I'm doing it virtual. But thank you for having this hearing. It's very important to me and my colleagues, and probably the future legislators who would like to serve on this committee. In the past, I did serve on these committees that are required to sit on the State and Tribal Relations Committee. I've even served as chair of the committee in the past, and along with the former senator, the late Bud Estes. And so right now, though, I am not a current member of these committees that require, such as, Fed and state, tax, and judiciary. I don't serve on those committees right now. And so it makes me ineligible to serve on the State and Tribal Relations Committee. And so before the committee, we have to play Monopoly and remove people off just temporarily and put me on. And then the chairmans get confused because then they think I'm a permanent member of their committee. And I always say, no, it's just for, so I can sit on this, I can go to this State and Tribal Relations Committee meeting. So I just ask committee that you please remove this requirement so I can continue to serve on the State and Tribal Relations Committee. I've served on there for 12 years. And I just ask that you please remove this requirement so I can serve on that committee without any kind of obstacles. Thank you.
Okay, and I believe that's all the proponents. We have a written proponent. Do we have any questions? Representative Sawyer, go ahead.
Speak as a proponent. I do have some written testimony.
Okay, just pass it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think they pretty much explained what the problem is. And I was here back in the 90s when we created this committee, and at the time it was created, that's when the compacts were a bit, the compacts were just being negotiated, and they were kind of a big issue. So at the time, we felt like we needed people from those committees. But today, tribal relations, it's very different. The compacts are long gone, and that background really isn't needed anymore. We have 3 members of our caucus who have a Native American heritage and want to serve on the Tribal Relations Committee, and it makes it pretty hard to put them on there because they're not necessarily interested in the committees that are required. So it would make it easier if we just opened it up to people that want to serve on the Tribal Relations Committee and not have these other requirements. And as they mentioned, the way we've been getting around it is we temporarily appoint them to one of the to the Fed and state or tax or judiciary, so they can meet, and then as soon as the meeting's done, we take them back off. So it's having to go through that obstacle every time. It'd be easy if we just change the law.
Do we have any questions for the proponents? Senator Fascadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Representative Tom Sawyer, Minority Leader of the House of Representatives. Currently, what is the makeup of that committee, and how many people serve on the committee generally?
I don't remember. I think one of either Christina or Paco, we could probably answer that better since they actually serve on the committee, or yes, staff.
Jason, thank you.
Okay, further questions?
He's going to tell me.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the Joint Committee consists of 12 members, 5 members of the Senate, 5 members of the House of Representatives, and then the governor or the governor's designee, and the Attorney General or the Attorney General's designee. So 12 altogether.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have a quick question for Representative Ponkowi Victors.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Representative. Can you just tell us a little bit of the type of issues that are discussed in the past 12 years, or not all 12 years, but some of the time you've served on that committee? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, this is an opportunity for the tribes to come forward, and we haven't really utilized this committee like I think we should. Like in the past, it's talked about gaming. Also, when we have the State and Tribal Relations Committee that meets, I kind of update everybody on Native American issues or bills that I might be working on that they might want to work with me on. And because of COVID, I actually was the chair during that time, and I wanted to update everybody and kind of have like an informational hearing. I don't remember if you remember the bill I had last year, me and Representative Haswood, having to do with the murdered and missing Indigenous women bill. So I would like to see this committee worked, meet more often than just once a year. But it seems like it's kind of hard to even get to that point because we have to figure out how to, put myself and my colleagues back on this committee every year, and then, uh, play, like I said, play Monopoly, and it gets kind of frustrating. So this will be a first step in the right direction, so that we can start meeting hopefully more than one time a year, because our Native American tribes, they have a lot of issues that they would like to bring forward, and they've told me in the past that they'd like to see this committee do more than just meet once a year.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, further questions? Not seeing any. Senator Hildebrand, you had something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If it's amicable to the rest of the committee, if we work this bill, I'd make a motion that we pass out House Bill 2462 favorably for passage.
Okay, hang on a second. We're still in the hearing phase, but let's hold that motion. Let's make sure there's no opponents to the bill. We'll close the hearing, and I'll accept that motion and second. Senator Hildebrand made the motion. Senator Vasco seconds it. Questions or comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against nay, it passes. 362 is on its way to the floor. Okay, we'll move back to Senate Bill 560. We'll move on to, we're still on the opponents. Is it Paul Schifflaker? I'm going to mess that up, but I tried.
Good morning, Chairman Olson. Paul Schlifke, I'm here representing the Kansas Peace Officers Association. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. The KPOA is kind of the boots on the ground organization for law enforcement in Kansas. We have members all the way from chiefs on down to patrol officers, 3,000 plus members, and we're the largest professional law enforcement organization or association in Kansas. And we respectfully oppose Senate Bill 560. Our association is long held. We're not opposed to cannabis-based medications, but we're strongly opposed to legalizing medical marijuana through use of methods that are not consistent with the pharmaceutical process. And one of the most compelling reasons KPOA stands in opposition to this bill is that marijuana is still illegal under federal law. We recognize other states have medical marijuana, but in Kansas, we encourage our citizens to obey the law, and as officers, we're supposed to set the example, and this bill specifically directs law enforcement officers in Kansas to ignore federal law. Progress is being made in developing pharmaceutical drugs containing THC and other marijuana derivatives, but through the FDC, or FDA, I'm sorry, these processes assure quality control, dosage control, and proper physician oversight. Marijuana convenience store sales cannot provide any assistance, and no matter what drugstore fills a prescription, the patient is receiving the same vetted drug, whether it's a brand name or generic at a specific dose. Marijuana prescriptions in states where medical marijuana exists allow patients who obtain a medical marijuana card to go to a variety of medical stores, marijuana stores, where each store has different varieties of marijuana, including edibles with different THC levels. And no prescription label, at least none that I've ever been prescribed, reads ingest whatever you want, when you want, until you feel better. One note about Senate Bill 560 is that while marijuana plant material is limited to a THC strength of 35%, there are no strength limits noted for other forms of marijuana. As my colleague from KBI noted yesterday, there are some forms of marijuana that can be chemically produced with as high THC levels as 95%. And there's no field test in Kansas that allows officers to test the percentage of THC in any marijuana product. And marijuana edibles, they're often packaged like candy or snacks with information about THC in small print. And edibles are recommended you take a small amount, wait, and Senate Bill 560 does address ensuring packaging is not attractive to children. However, what defines attractive? An edible has to be palatable for it to be used, and even if the form is not attractive, a household with legal marijuana present is a potential exposure for a child. KPOA is also concerned about the 30-day supply noted. What constitutes a 30-day supply? And while there's language concerning the amount that may be purchased, there's no language in the bill concerning the total amount of marijuana that can be possessed. And again, there's different strengths of marijuana on this bill because there's no specifics on the strengths. Senate Bill 560 does address medical marijuana cards from other states, meaning verifiable, but it does not specifically address methods about law enforcement's being able to confirm a medical marijuana card that we believe may be invalid, or if somebody says, well, yes, I have a medical marijuana card, I just don't have it with me. And the statute, again, as referred to earlier, says that they may share. There's nothing requiring to share with Kansas law enforcement the database. And we recognize that the bill prohibits operating a motor vehicle, watercraft, aircraft, et cetera, under the influence of medical marijuana. However, while there are blood alcohol levels that are prima facie in Kansas, if you're above this level, you're presumed intoxicated. There's no such thing in place for being under the influence of marijuana while operating a motor vehicle. And in summary, the KPOA recognizes medical marijuana in various forms has been legalized in other states. We do not oppose what benefits may be derived from medical marijuana. However, our stance is that if marijuana or ingredients are beneficial to treat people, it should be regulated and distributed in the same manner of other drugs, starting with changes in federal law, which allow physicians to prescribe thoroughly tested products through pharmacies. And I appreciate your time and stand for questions.
Okay, we'll hold questions. Daryl Atterbury, probably not saying that right, but then good.
I'm Daryl Atterbury, and I'm here representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police. We are pretty adamantly opposed to the legalization of cannabis marijuana products in the state of Kansas. But I'm going to approach this as if we were in favor of it, there are some things that need to change in this statute. And I would like to go through some of those right now. And the first being the dosage. There is no dosage. We see in the bill that there's a 30-day dosage. What is that? We heard yesterday that somebody wants to do a study and get colleges involved, but I've purchased enough software programs and listened to enough IT people. They have a software product and it doesn't have what I need, but they promise me that they're going to make it happen. I have yet to see it actually work that way. I've always been left in the lurch, okay? And we should never, and I changed my process, I never buy anything unless it works today and I see it. And I would like for you to do the same on that suggestion from yesterday. When you go to the doctor, you get a prescription. You go to the pharmacy, you get it. They put the instructions on there, how many pills you take, how often, and don't exceed this, and don't operate machinery, and so on and so forth. You can go to the CVS and get a bottle of aspirin and do the same thing. Those instructions are there. This what I've read, doesn't have that requirement to have those same restrictions or guidance for those people who would want to take any one of the products that are suggested here in the bill. The 35% limit on plant matter, that is really high. And then we also have a problem that there is no limit set for the oils, tinctures, edibles, patches, or any form approved by the Secretary of Revenue. I'll get back to that in a moment. The storage, that's another problem that's going to be an issue for law enforcement, because at present there is no requirement that the packaging, that the product remain in the original packaging. That's how we're going to know that the person is eligible to have it. Okay? If they take their product and put it in a baggie or some other bottle or package and start driving around with it, how are we supposed to know as law enforcement that that is what they bought from a dispensary? Okay, we need to know that, because if somebody doesn't need to be arrested, we don't want to arrest them. But if they do, we need to do our job and take that action. The next part is Section 11, and that authorizes the caregiver to possess medical marijuana. Okay, we understand how that works. But what happens if you have a critically ill patient, that patient passes away, and that caregiver is left with all that leftover product? What are they going to do with it? There's no provision for that in this bill. How are they supposed to dispose of that? Because they can't have it anymore because the patient isn't around anymore. So how are they supposed to take care of that? I think that's a reasonable thing for you to fix. The Medical Marijuana Advisory Committee. We believe strongly, the Chiefs Association, Sheriff's Association, the Officers Association believe that we all need representation on that committee. We do different types of policing. We have different things to bring to the table that affect our local communities, our counties, and on the state level. So we would like representation there. Now back to that one part I said I would get back to, and that was about the Secretary of Revenue determining what other types of, or what other forms of product would be available. That should be moved over to this committee and not set with that one individual, the Secretary of Revenue. That's our feeling on that. I move to Section 43. Every year, law enforcement officers in Kansas have a background check. Not at the start of the career and never again. We do it every single year. We look to see if they've been involved, an officer has been involved somewhere else in some activity. So we would suggest that you add Interpol in the search, the background search. That tells you if somebody has gone to a foreign country and been involved in criminal activity and then comes back to the United States to work in a dispensary, work in a grow operation, and so on and so forth. Do we want that person if they've been involved in serious criminal activity abroad? So that would be another. We have concerns about Section 52, and that has to do with 18 U.S.C. 922, or is that 933? It's in Section 52, and that has to do with the purchase of firearms by people with medical marijuana cards. They have to fill out I believe it's a Form 1 or Form 4, whichever form it is, to make a purchase of a firearm. Well, while our heart goes out to people with serious medical conditions who might want to use this product, we understand in law enforcement that a lot of these people are not going to be paragons of virtue. They're not good people, some of them, because bad people have maladies too. And if they're involved in illegal activity and they happen to be a medical marijuana card holder and they have gone out and purchased a firearm illegally, perjured themselves on the form, we should be able to use that in conjunction with our other part of our investigation instead of being restricted from using that. We believe that needs to be changed, expanded. worked out so that we can have more latitude. The ID card, we're concerned about our ability to find out who actually has a valid card. We don't know what these are going to look like yet. We don't know the security parameters, how they're going to be constructed, what security features they're going to have in them. But we, in law enforcement, need a 24/7, 365 ability to check those medical marijuana cards to make sure they're valid, so that if we have somebody with a large amount of product, because their 30 days worth is a pound, I'm exaggerating, sarcastic, then we want to know whether that's actually legally possessed by that person. So we need a way to find out whether they have a valid card, and that's not addressed here in the bill as yet. As mentioned before, we have a very serious issue with the plant matter being left in. While I realize that the gentleman here on the front row admitted yesterday, this is the guy we're talking about. If somebody needs this, this is the guy. But there are a whole lot of people out there that don't. Chronic pain from a hangnail qualifies in this. This guy is who should be for, not those other people. But plant matter just begs for abuse of this law. It's going to be lit up. Let there be no doubt in your mind. It's going to be lit up by, I won't say every person. They're not going to bake brownies with it. We believe that the dispensing of potent plant matter and extracts need to be, again, packaged well, packaged so that it doesn't appeal to children, so that it is clear what the content is, what is inside the package, clear for them, clear for us, because we're the ones who have to enforce these laws. So it needs to be clear to us. And from sale to when that product is gone, we seriously believe that it needs to remain in the original packaging. In section 15, the advisory committee, they have the ability to review any new malady that might be somebody might want to add to the list. But what that doesn't do is allow that same committee to go back to the original 19 items on that list and say that one is no longer supported by the medical community or science. We're taking that one off. Okay? That ability for that committee to do that just doesn't exist in this bill, and it needs to. I personally believe that some of the qualified medical conditions that are on there now should not be on there. An example would be glaucoma. The only thing on that list that might have some type of dosage suggestion, because the Glaucoma Society suggests through their research, peer-reviewed studies, that marijuana would have to be ingested every 5 to 6 hours, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to keep their ocular pressure down. Because after those 5 to 6 hours, the ocular pressure goes up to a dangerous level. That's kind of a dosage suggestion, but that glaucoma is on this list, and it shouldn't be, in my humble opinion. Again, we are opposed to this, and I would like to also point out, I sat through testimony yesterday. I didn't sit through the proponents the day before. But without exception, every single person who spoke yesterday, whether they were a proponent, neutral, or the first opponent, pointed out that there are many, many changes that need to come to this bill for it to be ready for prime time. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Okay, we'll hold questions. We're going to do one more, and then we'll kind of break it up into 2 question segments. Next up, virtual Sheriff Jeff Easter.
Good morning, Chairman and committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you today. My name is Jeff Easter. I am the KSA Legislative Chair for Kansas. I'll make this very brief. Our association does oppose Senate Bill 560 as it's written. Our association has long held if marijuana is to be prescribed by physicians and used as a medication, it should be subject to the same rigorous approval process that other commercially available drugs undergo. Potentially therapeutic components of marijuana should be investigated, but they should only be made available to the public after adequate testing by the FDA. Furthermore, these compounds should be dispensed via standardized and FDA-regulated pharmacies to ensure purity and concentration. KSA also understands that there is the need for medicinal marijuana for individuals that have certain ailments that does help them with the pain, or in cancer patients with nausea and vomiting. However, what we believe is that if it's truly a medicine, and that's what we've heard along here, this is medicine. Name any other medicine that gets distributed this way. There's not. So if we're going to treat it like a medicine, physicians should be prescribing, licensed physicians, and pharmacies should be fulfilling that prescription. Marijuana growers often breed their plants to alter the concentrations of different chemical compounds. For instance, the concentration of THC, the principal psychoactive ingredient, is more than 20-fold than marijuana products used several decades ago. Without rigorous clinical trials, there is no way of knowing which combinations of cannabinoids may be therapeutic and which may cause harm or damage. As marijuana dispensaries experiment by breeding out different cannabinoids in order to increase the potency of THC, there may be unanticipated negative and lasting effects for individuals who smoke these strains. One thing that we think is positive about the bill is the prohibition of smoking, combusting, or vaping the product. Another big issue that KSA specifically has, so a medical card holder gets booked into jail and they're going to be with us for a while. We dispense marijuana to them. That's not a good idea. There's nothing in here that covers that. If it's passed as medicinal or as medical marijuana, then we're going to have people in here smoking marijuana, which we already have a drug issue in the jails. And trust me, the inmates will figure out how to trade the marijuana that they're getting for other things that they want and or need. So there needs to be some type of amendment or addressing that if you have a medical marijuana card, you're not going to be prescribed marijuana inside the jail. So with that, I will stand for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to kind of split this up into two batch of questions for the opponents. Do we have any questions for these opponents? Senator Fasco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Sheriff Jeff Easter. So the commission that's listed in the bill, so a previous deputy spoke about having representation from law enforcement on that commission. So do you have a suggestion of the dispensing of the cannabis piece in here, a medical way to relieve that pain from that individual that might be in your county jail? So just the way that if a diabetic or a person with hypertension were in your county jail, you dispense that medication to them some way, somehow. So do you have a recommendation how? So, I mean, you know, it's always so hard to, you know, keep the bad characters out, but then to help Kansans with issues that we're faced with. And, you know, this issues that we've been addressing this, I believe, Mr. Chairman, since 2009, really, of how we implement this. Any suggestions on that, Sheriff Jeff Easter?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple FDA-approved drugs, which means they've been through the process. They have to be prescribed by a pharmacy, and that's dronabinol and nabilone. Both of those are THC-based, vetted, studied, and prescribed THC medications. That's available now at this point. because of those reasons.
You got a follow-up? You want to ask someone else? Go ahead.
Thank you. You're still the best sheriff in town, Jeff Easter. But my next question is for the first gentleman, Deputy Chief Paul, and how to pronounce your last name.
Hi, Senator, Deputy Chief Schlifke. How may I help you?
Okay, thank you. So some of your comments, I understand them, but wouldn't it then be a good reason to implement Senate Bill 560 so that we could kind of monitor a lot of the comments that you made? You mentioned about the children and the provision in there addressing, I think I have it right here, the packaging is wouldn't be attractive to children. So, you know, sometimes we object things, but you know, they're coming, the train is coming down the track anyway. And so wouldn't that be a good reason though to support the legislation in some way so that you're part of the decision, you're at the table helping to make those decisions?
Well, I think it would be better to fix potential issues now for future bills than, as the example you gave, to find out, well, this should have been written a different way, but because the child got into edibles that were not in the original packaging, we found out at the expense of that child's health that it should have been written a different way. So, I mean, again, I represent the KPOA, not myself, but my personal opinion, I think anything as even though it's not new in other states, I think anything as new as and important as medical marijuana in Kansas, I think it should, as many of these issues brought up, and we appreciate you listening to us, but as many of these issues that are brought up beforehand should be rewritten before the laws should be passed.
Go ahead, Vasco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and sir. So, and I agree with that part too. So on this very committee years ago, I introduced a bill to prevent the sales of and the location of the height level of cigarette lighters that looked like guns. You know, I had went on a ride around with firemen, firewomen too, and I saw all these videos where these kids thought these little cigarette lighters that looked like guns, you know, they were cool, they looked cute to play with, and they were setting themselves afire. But from that legislation, there was some opposition. You know, retailers wanted them right there at the checkout stand so you could see them and buy them. But, you know, by me introducing that bill and all the opposition that came, those items were raised higher than certain little children's eyes could see. And so that's why I'm like, something like this that a lot of Kansans say that they need, not that they just want, but they need so that they're not addicted to other painkillers. Sometimes it's good to move the legislation forward, but work on it and make it good for everybody. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Hosher.
Don't leave, come back, come back. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of along those same lines, I have some of the same thoughts in regards to packaging because I do think that's a concern. I think about Joe Camel and how he was used in terms of selling cigarettes to children. Specifically, do you have thoughts on do's and don'ts? And again, like cartoon characters are something that come to my mind that shouldn't be used on packaging because of the way it entices children. Do you have other thoughts on that?
Well, I've researched, and by researched, I don't mean done a 2-week study, but I mean I've researched, Google is our friend sometimes, packaging of edibles, and also based on that and also personal experience serving search warrants, and we do find, I realize we're talking about medical marijuana here. I don't want to change lanes, but personally seeing packaging of edibles while conducting search warrants, there's It's very similar to a gummy bear bag or any other snack bag, and in very little, there might be a little marijuana leaf on the front or the back, and be it a candy bar or whatever. I think the most thing that needs to be done, in my opinion, would be to put language into the bill that, first of all, it does have to remain, whatever product is purchased does have to remain in the original packaging, make it clearly a marijuana product or a cannabis product, and also language in the bill that if there are children in the home that, or people who are mentally impaired, it needs to be kept in a secure area away from those. That would be just shooting from the hip. Those would be my suggestions, Senator.
Okay, and then one thing, if I may, one thing you said there, keep it in the original packaging. If they have to have a card already, doesn't that provide the verification?
Well, it's another safeguard especially in edibles. In other words, don't take your edibles home. If they're cookies, don't take them home and put them in a cookie jar.
Oh, sure.
Keep them off the counter up above. And the other thing is, if law enforcement is there, and like the chief said, we don't want to arrest people. If this law goes, or future laws goes into effect, we don't want to arrest people for possession of marijuana if it's authorized medical marijuana. But that will allow us to determine, yes, these edibles in that case were purchased. It's still in the original packaging. It matches what's on the outside of the packaging.
Okay, I do have one other question.
Go ahead.
That's all right. And I don't know if you want to answer this or somebody else does. I was thinking from the hearing that was in the House that Chairman Barker asked law enforcement to look at what's done in the other 35 states in regard to the issue of what if you have somebody brought into the jail cell that is a patient. And I didn't know if there was any information in that regard or.
I'm going to defer to Sheriff Easter on that,
Okay,
because he's the expert on that, has the expertise, okay?
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for your questions, appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you.
Sheriff Easter? Are you still there?
Oh,
Okay, there you go.
yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I was muted. Good morning, Senator. And again, Jeff Easter with the Kansas Sheriff's Association Legislative Chair. Yeah, we've researched some of the places in Colorado and Oklahoma. They do not allow the leafy material or like a joint to be smoked in their jail. They do allow the FDA approved dronabinol and nabilone into their jail because it's a prescription. I hope that answers your question. If that's
Okay. Does that answer your question? Senator Close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Did we get any response, or were you heading there for the responses from KBI yesterday, or?
I don't know that, we can ask him. Go ahead and come up, and if you want to get them responses.
Good morning, Chairman Olson, members of the committee. My name's Robert Jacobs. I'm with the KBI. In response to Senator Clues, in response to your question, so your first question was about whether there's been any overdoses of marijuana that we are aware of. So there have been overdoses of marijuana, because an overdose would basically be just symptoms, adverse symptoms. If your question is related to deaths related to the use of marijuana, we are not aware of any of those.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it was in particular for the statement that was said, no one has died from overdose of marijuana. I appreciate that. And then did you have something concerning the THC level?
Yes, sir. So I talked to our laboratory, and your question was in reference to a previous conferee's comments regarding the ability to test and determine THC in a system 30 days either before or after use. the laboratory told me that really there's two main variables that you have to look at when you're determining use of THC in somebody's system. One is the type of intake, so whether that was smoked or an edible, consumed, things like that, and the frequency of use. Are they a chronic user or an occasional user? So those two things will make a difference as to how long that particular medication or substance stays in their system. Chronic users, you will be able to typically detect it longer because it's stored in the fatty tissues, so that it has a buildup, basically. The other thing that our lab told me is that when you're looking at testing, you have to look at and this gets a little complicated and scientific, but you have to look at the number of nanograms per milliliters. I don't want to get in over my head here, but we stop at 1 nanogram per milliliter. And so when you're looking at that, and I'm just going to give you some averages that they told me about, okay? When you're looking at chronic users, and this is in blood, chronic users, you will see a positive test of delta-9 THC for approximately 7 days. If you're looking at 11-hydroxy delta-9, which is another version, approximately 1 day. And then delta-9 carboxy THC can be anywhere up to 1 to 3 weeks. When you're looking at, and that's with chronic users, and an occasional user, delta-9, hydroxy delta-9 is approximately 10 hours, and delta-9 carboxy can be approximately 24 hours detected. It's different in urine. In urine, you can collect, and it is available up to about 30 days in urine in chronic users, okay? I think that the other important thing to just mention there to kind of round out that response is that when we looked at the data that we talked about yesterday from Colorado, they were looking at impairment. They weren't looking at whether the person was had it in their system. They looked at what was the cause of the traffic stop or the traffic accident, the fatality, and it was based on impairment. And so that's determining the impairment period of the medical marijuana or the marijuana is something you have to look at specifically, not necessarily whether it was just in the system. I hope that makes sense.
Other questions? Hold on.
Just
Senator Cluse?
for, is it Chief Atbury?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate the fact of you trying to bring some solutions or what we could look for to help law enforcement. Obviously, I am pro-law enforcement, and also, though, up front, I've worked in the area of hospice and end-of-life care for quite a number of years, and I just would like your response. You mentioned concerning leftover products. What's the protocol process right now, since end-of-life care involves so many opioids, morphine, and things like that? Can you address that just a little bit?
Yes, twice a year, my organization, and I know the Sheriff Easter also does it, and law enforcement agencies across the state and across the nation are involved in a DEA drug take-back, so that we give people, some organizations, an outlet to dispose of leftover drugs. And each time we do this, twice a year, I get anywhere from 100 to 200 pounds. That's a lot of pills. That's a lot of stuff. And I'm only one location. So we do give people an outlet to get rid of those and give them instructions. In my organization, in my lobby, Sedgwick County, the health department installed a drop-off box, and citizens can come in and drop them off. Caretakers could come in and drop it off in my drop box. But there's no requirement in this bill that would say they had to.
Okay, so with the potency of these opioids and the success in that, what you're saying is you'd like to see something addressed along those lines?
Yes.
You're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
It shouldn't stay out in the stream. It needs to be brought in and disposed of properly.
Okay, thank you for.
And just a note, we do this for a lot of reasons. One, it's public health, and two, it's the ecology, because we don't want, as I said, out in the stream, we don't want people flushing and disposing of things improperly, because it impacts our waterways. So tinctures, oils, and so on, they need to be dropped off and gotten rid of properly.
Okay, Senator Vasco, we still got some more opponents. just so you
I just have a quick question for the KBI gentleman. As you walk forward, you made a mention of you didn't have data on accidents relating to recreational marijuana or medical marijuana, but does your, and if you do, you can get the information to me or us later. I was just curious, you know, when we do hear of car accidents, it's usually related to you drunk driving, you know, well, I mean, well, not all, but when we compare, and I just wanted to know, do you have that on record, though, the accidents and fatalities that do result from a marijuana usage, medical or recreational, and or for DUIs? Just curious, comment on that.
Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Senator. Robert Jacobs again with KBI. Your question is related to types of drug use related to traffic accidents, specifically marijuana, or fatality accidents. I don't have those figures with us for Kansas. I can see if I can get those for you. The data that we presented earlier was based on Colorado, but it was based on the data from pre-medical marijuana established or passage in Colorado versus post-medical marijuana. And it was just medical marijuana. It was before the recreational marijuana had passed in Colorado. So, but I can certainly look at getting that for you as far as if there is data in Kansas relating to traffic accidents and fatality traffic accidents related to marijuana specifically.
Okay, Senator Hosher, and then we're going to get back to our opponents. Go ahead, Senator.
I'm just curious, and this would be for law enforcement. Is there anything in statute in regard to disposal of opioids as far as a patient in custody? Because I understand what you're saying. You want something in statute in regard to disposal of medicinal cannabis, and you have the days where you have the drug take back, that type of thing. So are there rules in statute in regard to opioids in those situations when you have a patient in your care and they die, or how they're disposed, whether they're in your custody or not, I guess?
Most, I think would be fair to say that most end-of-life hospice is in the home. There is no law I'm aware of that specifically deals with that. However, I can tell you that answering calls for people who pass at home who are in hospice, which sometimes we do because even though it's expected and everything, law enforcement is called, the hospice nurse or the caregiver is very good about disposing those items.
Okay, but we don't have anything.
But law enforcement, at least in my jurisdiction, does not get involved in that, though.
Okay, so we probably don't have anything in statute for other medications.
Well, it's against the law to be in possession of a prescription drug unless it's prescribed to you. But again, that's a medical professional situation instead of a criminal situation.
Right, okay. And then I do have one other question. Isn't there roadside testing that measures THC that's used in other states, like Arizona?
That I'm not familiar with.
Okay.
Okay, I do have one more question. Alicia Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and sorry about that. Listening to all of this and the drug take back and disposal, and either one of you, how would you classify marijuana as a drug? Is it a stimulant, a depressant, a hallucinogen, an opiate?
It's a hallucinogenic drug.
Okay, some information that I have from a health website says it's not that simple, that marijuana is actually affects people differently, that it can be a stimulant, it could be a depressant, it could be a hallucinogen, but it's never classified as an opiate.
I am going to leave that to the physicians who are going to testify
Perfect.
next.
Perfect, thank you, thank you.
I meant Senator Straub. Okay, we'll move back to our opponents, Dr. Eric Voth.
Senator Olson and members of the committee, I may be familiar to a few of you since I've testified for about 25 years on this. I'm Dr. Eric Voth. I practiced for 36 years here in Topeka at Stormont Vale in internal medicine, pain and addiction medicine. During that time, 10 years was spent running a chemical dependence program. I'm now retired, so I've got a lot of time to cause trouble. And I'm president of the International Academy on the Science and Impact of Cannabis. It's a group of physicians, scientists, marijuana experts that's pulled together internationally to try to get some sense around what's going on, because doctors are kind of one-offed around the country, and we've got a real serious problem here. First off, I want to state very clearly, I am opposed to the medical marijuana legislation. It's making medicine by popular vote. It's wrong-minded, but I understand there's a lot of horsepower behind it, so I'm going to point out some of the flaws in the legislation. I will get to the issue of deaths because there's well-defined information there. Going well back into the 70s, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws characterized the medical marijuana movement as, quote, from their meetings, getting the camel's nose under the tent. And there is no question that they've used the medical marijuana process as a Trojan horse. Every state that has legalized marijuana has had medical marijuana first. My point is, if you want to talk about legalization, let's split the issue. Let's leave medicine to medicine, and let's go at it as two separate issues, because they really are highly separate. Now, I do want to not miss 560 here, because we've got some big areas that need improvement if you are going to proceed with this, which I certainly hope you don't. The first is that the list of medical disorders is incredible. There are at least 22 disorders there, of which only pain has reasonable science behind it, and then it has the catchword other serious disorders. All of those should be stricken, and the only thing I would support would be, as a last resort, after other approved medications for various types of pain, such as neuropathic pain. There may be some benefit there. It's still mixed. Brand new article I've got in my folder, which I didn't have a chance to put in that huge packet I sent you, does talk about that. I would also point out that some of the proposed disorders, such as for psychiatric disorders, should be contraindicated. There are serious side effects from marijuana, particularly as the concentrations get higher, and psychosis, suicide, mania, overdose, etc., are definitely related to those higher dose marijuana preparations. The other thing that is striking to me is that there really is no standard of care set. We practice in medicine by a general standard of care, what people should have when they come to a visit and what they should go through, physical exams, history, etc. So my colleagues and I put together, which is in your packet, a paper that is entitled The Standard of Care for the Use of Medicinal Marijuana. And we go through the testing, the physical exams, the type of questioning, the follow-up, the warnings, which we do not have on medication, on marijuana, and the recommended monitoring. I'd also point out, and I know that the industry is going to want to climb all over me for this, because they really want the high-dose THC, because that's where their profits are. It should be limited at 10%. That is also included in your packet. I've listed 45 citations, medical studies that talked about psychotic episodes and also the negative side effects like psychosis that happen above 10% THC, and that should be whether it's vaped, smoked, whatever. 10% seems to be that threshold, and you're way, way beyond that. I've personally treated folks that have come back from Colorado after vaping higher preparations, absolutely psychotic, out of their mind, several having to be hospitalized, some even unable to come home from Colorado, and their families called, what the heck do we do with them? And there are many other examples of that. I'd also say that there absolutely should not be immunity nor protections from litigation. You'd be giving protections to people prescribing or recommending marijuana that you don't have for prescribing OxyContin or fentanyl. So that should absolutely be stricken. And what's more, I would say that I think we should hold providers accountable if they're recommending marijuana or any of the other preparations, if they're recommending it and they're not making the follow-throughs and they're not doing the physical exams and they're not testing the patients to see what's going on. And I would hope that there would be litigation that would begin to come forth from trial lawyers in that regard. Purity. This is another area that's really a problem, especially in the oils. There have been analyses of the oils showing contaminants, heavy metals, et cetera. That needs to be required, tested, and documented in the preparations of THC. Obviously, you can't do that with leaf marijuana, but you certainly can do that with the oils. You'd asked about deaths. Yes, there are documented deaths that were cardiac related with the high dose marijuana. We've seen a whole series of suicides showing up with the higher dose THC. It is well documented now, and actually some of the parents' organizations that have come to me have talked about how they lost a child who had no other psychiatric problems until they started using marijuana, got extremely depressed, committed suicide. The other area where there are deaths associated, which is probably one arm's length, is the opioid increases. I've tracked this around the country. States have a variability as to what they report, but I can tell you for sure that in Colorado, certainly California, Washington, and Oregon, there was a distinct relationship to the legalization of marijuana. And the nice thing about Colorado was they tracked it early, so they had medical marijuana first, and their traffic-related fatalities went up, and then they skipped up again when they generally legalized it. Same similar kind of thing seen with opiate overdoses. In the fiscal note, I see that the the dollars are going to be sprinkled around in a lot of areas, I assume to garner goodwill. I think it really ought to be focused into treatment and prevention. I want to point out also that, you know, while you will hear generally fairly well-contained proponents, I've had death threats, I've had all sorts of aggressive actions towards me, I've been backed against walls, and I will tell you that I now will not speak in public or in some large situation without armed law enforcement, and I've actually had to have a law enforcement escort out of Wichita because of such activity. Don't think that marijuana use is simple, and if you want to argue general legalization, go argue that, but I think you need to keep it out of the medical arena. And I'm open for questions.
Okay, we'll hold questions. Next up is virtual Dr. Catherine Antley. I might be saying it wrong, but are you on there?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Senate. I'm speaking today in opposition of your Senate Bill SB 560. My name is Dr. Catherine Antley. I'm a physician board certified. I'm triple boarded in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and dermatopathology, and I have served as the laboratory director for the past 20 years. I have no conflicts of interest. I do not take money from the marijuana industry. And I'm here today because physicians are concerned about the changes that we're seeing in states which previously legalized and commercialized so-called medical marijuana. We care about our patients, and we understand we understand how some lobby groups can impact policy, which can in turn harm our patients as the industry pursues profit. We're concerned about the costs, which are later then borne by families. Of course, we've seen this with tobacco and the opioid industries in the past, which have also pushed their drugs as beneficial while ignoring science and grave risks. We know that in 1979, Keith Stroop, head of NORML, stated, quote, "We will use medical marijuana as a red herring to give marijuana a good name," admitting that medical marijuana is a pretext for commercialized recreational legalization. Recently, advocates have pushed their agenda through medicine by popular vote or legislature rather than through the rigorous scientific testing system devised in this country to protect Americans from quack medicine. So where did big marijuana learn this trick? In the 1920s and 30s, the tobacco industry relied on Dr. Beatty's asthma cigarettes and later scientific evidence of smoking Chesterfield is best for you to sell their products. However, as we know, by 1964, Congress had released a statement linking smoking to cancer and using at least the same criteria as we now use, which links cannabis to psychosis, increased schizophrenia, self-harm, suicidality, in patients with no history of mental illness, as well, of course, as cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which is painful, uncontrolled vomiting, which is a syndrome which essentially did not exist prior to the commercialization of marijuana. We've also seen teen and adult addiction or use disorder and more. In 2006, Colorado was close to the national average in past month teen marijuana use. Under just medical marijuana, however, by 2011, Colorado was one of the states at the top of the national average in teen marijuana use. A third to a half of Colorado teens entering treatment for marijuana addiction were obtaining their marijuana from quote unquote a licensed user, meaning diverted medical marijuana, which has become an enormous problem in Colorado. In Vermont as well, our teen use has gone from average up to one of the top in the country as well. Medical marijuana dispensaries in Colorado and in Vermont help decide, medical marijuana dispensaries in Colorado and Vermont help decide dose, frequency, potency, and apparently also weigh in regarding toxicity and contraindication. Very concerningly, 69% of medical marijuana shopkeepers or bud keepers in one study incorrectly and against medical advice recommended marijuana to pregnant women. And many of those bud tenders suggested that the women not consult their obstetrician. If the same person recommends use sells the drug that introduces potential conflict and bias, there is good reason that pharmacists do not recommend and then sell you psychoactive, addictive, potentially harmful meds all in one shop, which they own. In other states, after other states have approved medical marijuana, conditions approved for medical marijuana, which are objective, such as HIV, cancer, end of life, nausea for chemotherapy, increased 11 times. However, the subjective diagnosis of severe pain increased 30 times. And in 2012, 94% of medical marijuana was given for the subjective diagnosis of severe pain, mostly to young men and often with a history of use disorder. An example of why doctors follow evidence-based medicine and not anecdote is post-traumatic stress disorder. This should not qualify as an indication for, quote, medical marijuana. Vermont Health Department reviewed the science around PTSD, and they reported that marijuana use was associated with significantly greater PTSD symptom severity, other drug use, hazardous alcohol use, depressive symptoms, and suicidality. The harms and risk of cannabis use are ignored by the industry, but now, just last year in Colorado, we have a new law in which everyone who buys marijuana greater than 10% THC must be warned that this product may cause psychosis, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, severe mental illness, and more. Medical marijuana is not a regulated or pure product. Across states, medical marijuana and state-sanctioned shops contain dangerous pesticides, heavy metals, and mold. Vulnerable patients have developed serious infections due to these contaminants, particularly the molds such as Aspergillus. Denver Health Department found in one survey that 80% of the medical dispensaries were selling moldy marijuana. Mold has been an ongoing problem in Vermont's medical marijuana shops. Your bill allows THC concentrations of 35%. There is no reliable research that indicates a legitimate use for THC at concentrations greater than 10%. 10% THC Marinol is currently available from your doctor by prescription obtained from your pharmacy. Medical marijuana laws inappropriately shield doctors from liability, malpractice claims, or litigation if their patients become ill from the use of cannabis that they recommend. I'll end with a note of caution. A few decades ago, Laetrile was approved by more than a dozen state legislatures for cancer treatment at the urging of charlatans and profiteers. Eventually, scientifically evaluated, the drug was found not to cure cancer at all, but was found to be poisonous. The hucksters were eventually punished for their deception, but in this instance, the process which allowed lawmakers to evaluate drugs for medical use was a health risk to the public and resulted in patient harm. Is state legislature the best place to evaluate the indications, drug-drug interactions, risks, contraindications of an addictive psychoactive drug with known potential to cause psychosis, intractable vomiting, premature death of babies, small for gestational age, and children with increased risk of autism or hyperactivity? I urge a no vote on your bill, S560, and I'm available for questions. And I also have a list of people who've died, whose autopsy came to the conclusion that their cause of death was due to cannabis. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Elizabeth Stain? I might be saying that wrong. I believe it's virtual. What is it? Stout?
Thank you. Can
Yeah,
you
go
hear
ahead.
me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I really appreciate you allowing me to testify today. My name is Dr. Libby Stout, Elizabeth Stout. I am a board-certified addiction psychiatrist from your neighboring state of Colorado. And I have been working in this field for the last 30 years. For the last 20 years, I was the medical director for a 90-day inpatient treatment program funded by the state of Colorado for dual diagnosis or people with co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse problems that had failed everything else. And so it was a pretty phenomenal program. 80% of those people were there as a condition of probation due to legal charges, usually due to their substance use. And so I had a lot of experience working with these populations. And in 2000, when Colorado legalized medical marijuana, I wasn't really concerned about it. I'd been treating marijuana addiction for a long time, and I didn't think it would be any different. But in 2000, the highest potency in the plant was 5% THC, and we had no concentrates. By 2009, 2010, the potency had dramatically increased in both the plants, and the concentrates started appearing. We also had the Ogden Memorandum that came out of the Obama administration that allowed any state that had a medical marijuana law, they wouldn't have prosecution if people were following the law. So in 2009, we had 5,000 people on the medical marijuana registry. By 2011, we had 119,000 people on the registry. So people flocked to get their medical marijuana card. And then we had this law in Colorado, which I would call very misguided, and I also call stupid, that allowed people on probation to use medical marijuana if they had a medical marijuana card. Now, the problem was they were not using the low potency marijuana, which has research behind it. They were using shatter, wax, they were dabbing these very high potency products that were causing significant problems. And so in my treatment program, I started seeing really significant problems that I had never seen before. Normally, most of these people that I treat come in with a problem with alcohol, heroin, or methamphetamine. They also do smoke marijuana, but that wasn't the primary problem. I started seeing people where that was the primary problem, and that was the only drug they were using. And I was seeing people with very severe psychotic symptoms and very severe delusional problems. It's very interesting to work with people with severe delusions because for the most part, they look totally normal until you get into their delusional system. And then they don't look normal at all. Like I'd have young people who believed the CIA had implanted things into their brain. And what was problem was these were people were using these products up to admission. And so the first month was a waste of time because we couldn't really get them focused. Their brain was really having problems because of the cognitive issues related to these high potency products. I started trying to get people's attention and talked about this because I actually got to the point where I was saying that I thought this was the worst drug we had, worse than methamphetamine in terms of creating psychosis because of the very severe issues I was seeing. Now, I am actually somebody who supports decriminalization, and I can support the use of medical marijuana that's following the science. And I want to point out, you have my written statements, that there's a really nice graph that actually comes out of Dr. Ashcroft's publication. He tried as a proponent yesterday, but this is from his publication that shows that there is this curve that when you have an unregulated illegal market, you have significant public health problems for sure. And that's what prohibition does. When you go down to decriminalization, you decrease that significantly. When you have legalization with strict regulations, that's the best part of it. However, when you have legalization without restrictions, which I see we have in Colorado right now with this no control on the potency, you end up having significant health problems. So there is research that demonstrates that marijuana can be helpful for some medical conditions. All of that research has been done on THC less than 10%. And most of the studies have been done on cannabinoids, isolated cannabinoids, like the prescription drugs that were mentioned, like dronabinol or nabilone or Sativex. And in my written handout, I gave a figure from another paper, a big researcher on cannabis and pain. And even he says that the limit is 10%. Somebody who's an active marijuana user may be able to trade a little higher, but when you get into the higher frequency areas, you start having all kinds of consequences. And the sad thing is, what's available in Colorado right now, if you'll see in my other graph, all 15% or higher. It's very difficult to find anything that is low potency that is followed by the science. So when I'm working with somebody and trying to get them to do a harm reduction model where I see that they're having significant problems because they're vaping 60% hash oil, and I tell them, go find the stuff that's less than 10%. They cannot find it. It doesn't exist. And so the reality is, this is why the industry fights potency caps. The more potent a drug, the more likely is the addiction. We know this from all other drugs. If you look at OxyContin, for example, our opiate crisis, codeine is not nearly as addictive as OxyContin is. And now we have fentanyl, which is a much more powerful opiate, and it's extremely addicting. And so we have the same thing in the marijuana industry. When I was in medical school a long time ago, I was told it wasn't addicting. And that's the lie that the marijuana industry continues to say. Because yes, in the olden days, all the way up to the 1980s, THC was less than 2 to 3%. And that was not considered addicting. Now, what we have data, research from around the world showing higher is truly potentially addicting, and that's how you keep customers. I mean, you have to have an addicting product. The tobacco industry knows this quite well. So your bill has many indications that have no research behind them at all. And I will just stick to my field. But I agree with the previous presenter that there is no research showing that glaucoma is helped by this, really. But anyway, PTSD, I treat that a lot. So that's the number one diagnosis that I treat. I've seen many people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And yes, marijuana works for the symptoms. Yes, it does, just like alcohol works, just like benzodiazepines work, in the fact that it numbs you. It takes away the symptoms, so you don't have the intrusive thoughts, you don't have the startle reflex. However, like any addictive drug, you have to use it every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, and then that sets you up for addiction. And then you can't get off of it. And PTSD is a curable diagnosis. I have worked with so many people that have totally recovered from PTSD, but it doesn't involve using addictive drugs. In fact, most of the treatments we use to help people with PTSD, like eye movement desensitization reprocessing, is not very effective when somebody's under the influence of an addictive drug like marijuana. There are many studies showing the problems with PTSD and marijuana, and none of the studies that they have tried to show the benefit have shown the benefit. So if you look at the massive amount of research that's out there on PTSD, there is no true benefit. And you have this thing that says any psychiatric condition that a doctor thinks the marijuana might help, what we now see in the literature is that marijuana worsens psychiatric conditions. It worsens anxiety, it worsens depression, it can lead to suicide, and the biggest problem is the psychosis. And all of this is with the higher potency. So most of the studies on psychosis show that when you get, and I have a graph in my hand out there for you, from a study that was done in Europe, looking at 10% or higher. If they're using 10% or higher, they have a 3 times increased risk of psychosis compared to the people using 5%. And then if they are using it daily, they have a 5 increase.
If you could wind up, I'd appreciate it. I mean, we're about done with committee, so I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right. My final thing is I agree that I don't think there should be any protection against litigation for people that are recommending marijuana. That's crazy, because if somebody gives somebody high potency THC and they have a psychotic episode without the warning that that might happen, then I think they should have litigation. So I appreciate you listening to me. Thank you very much. I'm open for any questions.
Okay, questions for we got some written opponents. Questions, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is for Dr. Voth or any of the doctors that have testified here. Under number 7 in your testimony, you said that there should not be protections from litigation or malpractice for practitioners that recommend marijuana use. Would you agree that there should not be protection from litigation for any recommendation of any medical treatment or vaccine recommendation either?
Off. Are you talking in general terms, or are you talking about, well, I don't know, there are probably some areas that physicians should be protected, but, my discussions today, and I am a physician, and I have been a medical a malpractice expert. In fact, I've testified in about 100 different cases. So I do think there's a place for malpractice. I think we've got to be careful at what we allow, but we certainly do not want to give immunity to people that recommend marijuana.
Okay, one more question, if I may.
If you have a more specific thing on the immunity, I'd discuss it. I'm all for vaccinations. I think we need vaccinations heavily. And that's solid medical evidence. And just because someone recommends it, I don't think that's a reason to sue them, if that's what you're saying, but I don't know. Go ahead.
Just asking if you agreed with protection from litigation for some things and not others.
It depends on the situation, right?
Okay, then my next question is, in your experience, and it seems that you must have a lot of experience with drug use and pain management, have you had more patients with alcohol, marijuana, or opioid addiction?
The vast majority have been alcohol or alcohol and marijuana. The opioid addictions have come in more recently, and a lot of that depends on their setting. I would say that it's pretty rare to see an opioid addict that didn't have a marijuana or alcohol problem previously. There are some, and they literally generally come in when they're getting higher dose opiates quickly early on, and it's not closely supervised. I'll tell you also, literally 30 years of pain management, I can honestly say I never created a, quote, opiate addict because I very carefully managed their doses, et cetera, so. And I tracked all that.
So you can stop someone from becoming an opioid addict?
You can prevent it. If they are an addict, there's ways to treat it and taper it, but you certainly can prevent it. And again, that's addiction, you know, where it's uncontrolled and compulsive seeking, et cetera. Yeah.
Other questions? Senator Vasco, though.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not really a question, just a comment. I really do appreciate the information from Dr. Volth, and so that I don't mispronounce their last names, Dr. Catherine and Dr. Elizabeth. But you kind of, both the doctors at the end kind of made me think of the commercials on TV when it says, if you take this, you know, all these different things may occur. And so, Mr. Chairman, my comment is just this. So recently, I think most of you know that my niece passed away. And during that time that she was in hospice, Mr. Chairman, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a physician. And I saw both usages in hospice care. I saw the way that she responded to medical cannabis, and I saw the way that my niece responded to morphine. And she was more alert with the other usage, the morphine, she was just out of it. And so I don't know. I just know that there is a need to relieve pain without the addiction part of it. And I hope that we, Mr. Chairman, can work things out to help alleviate the pain and address the physician's concern at the same time and to help all Kansans. Thank you.
Senator Hosher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a question. The gentleman from KBI indicated earlier that no deaths have resulted from cannabis, but I thought we heard some information contrary to that. So I'm wondering, are we talking about deaths that are a combination of drugs in a person's system?
Well, there are published episodes of cardiac death from cannabis. Then suicides are now well known and being tracked more and more that are directly related. It's a different drug than opiates, and opiates suppress respiration and can directly kill a person. Boom, just take it and you're down. Cannabis typically is not that way, but with these higher doses and higher THC concentrations, there's a thought that there may be more likelihood to trigger cardiac arrhythmias and death. But there are cases of direct fatalities from it, yeah. Not to mention car accidents and the downstream opiate use.
Okay, thank you, because my understanding is we sometimes see a combination of different drugs that are listed as the cause of death in some situations, not just singularly.
Sure, absolutely.
Senator Brown?
Dr. Voth, if you wouldn't mind standing up there. How many deaths have been attributed to overdose of smoking cigarettes?
Oh my, at least 400,000 a year.
From overdosing?
Well, from the deaths associated with smoking, yeah.
Okay, but how many from overdosing?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you that. Don't study it.
Okay, so, all right, thank you.
Senator Cluse?
Doctor, if you don't mind, sorry about that.
It's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it may have been actually Dr. Elizabeth, but I just, you can respond to this. There was a statement made that medicinal marijuana just covers the symptoms, if I understood that statement correctly, but it doesn't all medicine mostly just cover the symptoms and don't necessarily treat the problem? Or can you respond to that?
I didn't catch that in her testimony. I'd have to catch her back and have comment on that. You know, I think it's, you know, if you're treating symptoms like nausea or something like that, yes. I mean, that's more direct. I'm not sure what that was relative to, though.
I think Dr. Stout's available.
Was it?
Is this?
It's Dr. Antley.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we give antihypertensives that reduce the, you know, left ventricle. We give cancer drugs that shrink tumors. We all the time we give medicines that address the root cause of an illness. So I wouldn't say all medicines are for symptom relief. No. And you know, I'm a pathologist, so I'll talk about a couple of, you know, postmortems that we have where the pathologist has issued reports and even published them. One was a pediatric case of an 11-year-old who got into some marijuana, and they found on postmortem that he had myocarditis, and that's been linked to marijuana use. There is a British woman named Gemma Mose, who was 31 years old. Her postmortem also revealed marijuana use, nothing else. We have a number of folks who took marijuana, became acutely psychotic with no previous history of family history or personal history of mental illness. And the very first one was a young exchange student from, I believe, Wyoming, who was in Denver and jumped to his death. He was just 19 years old. Here in South Burlington, Vermont, we had a fellow just a few blocks from our lab who took, you know, high-dose marijuana, clutched his child, who was about 2 years old, to his chest, and jumped out of the 4th floor of his building saying God made him do it. He had no history of mental illness either. They miraculously both survived, but there are many instances in addiction, of course, to the automobile fatalities, of which we had one in which someone, you know, killed 5 young teens in a fiery accident. Also had high THC levels. I could go on.
Okay, hang on. Does that answer your question, Senator Cluse? Yes. Okay, well, thank you. Any further questions? Not seeing any. That's all the opponents. We're going to jump back just for 1 second. There was one proponent. I don't know if she's here or virtual, Jacqueline Patterson. If you just give us a quick couple of minutes, I think we're.
Are you kidding me? I have cerebral palsy, and so I stutter.
Okay.
I specifically requested to go first today so that I was properly medicated, and now you're asking me to rush, which is gonna make me stutter more.
Take your time, take your time.
Thank you. My name is Jacqueline Patterson, and I am a mother a, a, a housing rights advocate, a disability rights advocate, a filmmaker, a a founding and proud member of the Low Income Local Advisory Committee, a board member of the Bolinas Up Community Center. I'm gonna skip the rest of that paragraph in the interest of saving time. I asked to go first today because I have a disability called cerebral palsy. Mine was likely caused by a stroke during my very premature birth and has resulted in what I like to refer to as speech spasms and weakness and less muscle tone on the right side of my body. Growing up with a disability in Kansas City was rough, and going to school with a disability was even tougher. I could handle getting made fun of by the children, but getting told by the teachers that I couldn't try out for school plays, or that they had no interest in changing the behaviors of the kids who made fun of the disabled kids, and being treated like I would never do anything because I was disabled, produced a mental anguish that almost matched the physical pain that I had due to muscle spasticity and general tightness. My class was the first class to learn the DARE curriculum, and I was quite against cannabis as a child until I went searching for a cure for my stutter. I found Jackie Hare's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, about how we've all been lied to about marijuana and how cannabis hemp can save the world. It took me a couple more years to actually try cannabis because as a teenager trying an illicit drug in a safe environment was a little bit tricky. And I needed to observe other people use cannabis before I was willing to try it. To me, it seemed nicer than alcohol. And when I finally and when I and when I did try it finally with and when I did try it finally safe with a good friend who had stolen some from his parents, I noticed that not only was I not in pain for the first time in my life, but I could speak clearly. I could speak clearly with very little with very little with very little very little with very little with very little effort. The reason that I asked to go first today was so that you could see me properly out medicated and I could get through my testimony. Obviously that didn't happen. I medicated while I was in Missouri, and then I came here, and obviously it is no longer helping me, but it is actually still helping me with my pain. I've been using medical cannabis on and off since I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, I felt really bad about it because I was taught in school that only bad people use drugs. This is not the case. All kinds of people use drugs, and many people use cannabis. And most people who use cannabis are using it medically, whether they know it or not. Cannabis works with our endocannabinoid system to bring our bodies to homeostasis. It works as a neuroprotectant, and it calms irritation of the gut, which makes cannabis as effective at treating epilepsy as it is for treating Crohn's. As you are aware, there are epileptic children in Kansas who will need medical cannabis, and children with cancer. But there will also be children with cerebral palsy, autism, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, lupus, and muscular dystrophy, who could lead better, healthier lives with medical cannabis. And it's important to list these conditions in the bill because medical cannabis research is so new in the United States that doctors don't always know what conditions it's effective for. And while I know, or at least I hope, that most of you want that most of you want children to have the medicine that they need to stay alive and hopefully thrive. I know that you are deeply concerned with keeping marijuana out of the hands and bodies of children and teens who don't need it, so much so that smoking and vaporation have been banned along with any other form of cannabis that might be attractive to minors. When the reality of the situation is that the best way to keep most kids safe from using drugs that they do not need is to keep them safe and secure and give them something constructive to do. If your goal is to limit what medical cannabis can be sold to Kansans, to what is unattractive to teens, you are going to be stuck with suppositories. And even that's not guaranteed. Meanwhile, you will be rendering medical cannabis ineffective to a patient population that you wish to protect. People with glaucoma find only that smoking helps them to reduce the intraocular pressure and keep them from going blind. Eating cannabis will do nothing for these patients. The first federal marijuana patient suffered from glaucoma, and he sued the federal government for the right to smoke marijuana to save his vision. His name was Robert Randall, and not only did he secure federally grown cannabis for himself, but he helped 14 other patients get approved into the program. That allow doctors to prescribe cannabis as an investigational new drug. 11 of whom began receiving federal marijuana before the first Bush administration shut down shut down the program due to an influx of applications from AIDS and HIV patients. Mr. Randall had helped streamline the process for these patients who were at risk of death without immediate access to medical cannabis. All medical marijuana prescribed was prescribed to be smoked, and it was sent to pharmacies rolled into joints and shipped in cans of 300 joints. When the federal program shut down, advocates in California stepped up to pass Proposition 215 and instigated this patchwork of state laws that we have now. So there is your mini medical marijuana history for the day. Please be aware that legalizing medical cannabis reduces inappropriate use by adolescents, and prohibition of certain delivery methods will be ignored and difficult to enforce. I would like to thank you for the patient protections in your bill. As a parent who lost custody of one of my children in Iowa because of my advocacy, I can attest to how awful such an experience is, and as a drug war refugee, I can attest that patients are best able to get better in their home states when at all possible. I would also like to thank you for encouraging Native American production of medical cannabis, and ask that you reduce or dismiss fees for Native-owned businesses, and work with them and your wonderful university system to build a thriving medical cannabis economy that benefits Native American communities while cultivating patient access to medical marijuana. Thank you for your time.
Questions? Okay. We'll go ahead and close the hearing on 560. I want to thank everybody for coming today. It's 3 long days of testimony. Proponents, neutrals, and opponents. Got a lot of good information. We will close that hearing. We're going to work a couple bills today. Jason, why don't we start off with 522? Why don't you give us a background, 522, and everybody can pull their files out.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senate Bill 522 was the bill that would require the State Board of Education to establish curriculum guidelines for a standardized firearms safety education program. The bill also provides that those guidelines be based on existing programs, based on grades, so that in kindergarten grades 1 through 5, it would be based on the Eddie Eagle Gun Safe program offered by the National Rifle Association. For grades 6 through 8, it would be either that program or the Hunter Education in Our Schools program provided by the Department of Wildlife and Parks. And for grades 9 through 12, it would be based on the Hunter Education in Our Schools program. Whether the program is offered by a school district would be left up to the discretion of the local school board.
Okay. Questions of Jason? What does the committee want to do? Oh.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr. Chair. Did we ever have an answer to the question of, is the program utilized in any private schools? I don't know that. I think you had left the room when I asked that. And the question also was, this bill in particular, does it say that it's only for public schools?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I do not know if any private schools are already offering firearm safety education programs as part of their curriculum or extracurricular activities. This bill does only address public schools in terms of specifying that a public board of education can elect to provide a firearm safety education, and if it does so, the instruction must be in accordance with the curriculum guidelines established by the State Board of Education. So those guidelines would be available, but not necessarily have to be followed by a private school that was offering a firearm safety program.
Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, would an accredited private school still have to fall under this, though?
The bill does not specify accredited private schools. General practice and statute is to specify those if the intent of the legislature is to make them subject to the same requirements as public school districts.
Are you done? Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, so for those who are listening in and for myself again, if you could refresh my memory on, so we have a person who's already employed with a school district, teach the training or the safety of gun use to the children in our public schools, and so do they go, or is it a person that goes into the school to teach, so they come in, or they are already an educator with the public schools? And then, did it have the safety, the gun lock box safety piece in this legislation?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the availability and the structure of the course will be left to the discretion of the local school board, so they could either contract out for instructors in those courses and offer them that way, or they could look to school district personnel to provide the instruction on those courses. This bill does not contain any provisions with respect to securing firearms in the home or other location.
Go ahead, Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is, I don't know, I introduced a piece, Royals Act, to include safety lock box procedures in there, because a 9-year-old and an 8-year-old children were playing at a play date, and a lock box was unlocked, or it was broken actually, and one of them, the 8-year-old accidentally killed the 9-year-old. And so anyway, if we're teaching safety, I think it should be inclusive to all, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, further questions? Senator Osher.
Yeah, there was another question asked the other day that I think you had left at that point. Where in the bill does it say that firearms and ammo are not allowed in the school by the instructor or the person who would be teaching firearm safety?
There is no language in the bill regarding whether or not firearms or ammunition could be brought onto the school premises.
Sorry, guys. Senator Fasquedo, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to a follow-up to Senator Holscher's comment, so then how would this legislation get around current law and districts that on the doors it says no guns? How does that work?
Firearms are permissible in school buildings, subject to the policies and procedures of the local school board. And so for instruction courses such as this, they could allow firearms and ammunition to be brought onto the school premises.
Go ahead, Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, but a local school board could also say no to bringing firearms or ammunition on school grounds, even for teaching this, correct?
That is correct.
Senator Peterson.
Thank you. Going back to the lockbox issue, the instructions would have helped if someone would have known to see the gun, stop, don't touch, run away, go tell an adult. That is the basic premises if they're trying to teach in these courses, and that would have helped in that situation where they found an unlocked lockbox. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Close.
Yeah, I am in support of this bill. I think anytime we can help children because they learn by repetition, you know, there's a lot of different safety programs out there, stop, drop, and roll, and anything we can do to help educate our kids and with some of the guardrails in this bill, I think this is something that I'd like to see happen. Thank you.
Okay. Well, what's the pleasure? Senator Hildebrand or Senator Osher, go ahead.
I just had the question, did we have any testimony that came from teachers, administrators, staff, or any groups that are directly linked to public schools in regard to this bill?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I would make the comment that in light of the incidents we just recently had at Olathe East, there are a number of people not yet ready to talk on this issue who very much have thoughts in regard to what should be done. And it seems a little premature to potentially be acting on this bill when we haven't heard from those voices. I would make a substitute motion to table the bill, or make the motion to table the bill.
There's no motion.
Sorry, so I would make the.
But number one, this was scheduled and then postponed a week. There's plenty of time for people to sign up. So, Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a perfect time to talk about gun safety, and I will make a substitute motion to pass out Senate Bill 560 favorably for passage.
Okay, do we have a second? Senator Cluse seconds. Question? Oh, wait, yeah. Well, let's back up.
Oh, hey, thanks for catching that.
Rescind that
I
motion?
rescind that motion. Sorry, I looked down at the wrong note. 522 favorably for passage.
Hold on. You want to withdraw your second, and you want to withdraw your first? We've outpassed the marijuana bill out there.
Chuck, I owe you one. A big one.
Okay, Senator Hildebrand, you have the floor. We've withdrawn 560 and because you erred.
That was a huge error on my part, and I do appreciate Mr. Tuck Duncan correcting that. And so my substitute motion is actually to pass out Senate Bill 522 favorably for passage.
Okay, and do I have a second? Yes. Senator Cluse seconds. Questions or comments? Senator Hosher?
Yes, thank you. Again, I do think it's premature to act on this bill in regard to the fact that we just had a very concerning, severe situation happen at my son's school, not even, well, 2 weeks ago. people who would be most affected by this legislation are not yet ready to speak about it. When you have gun violence in your school, it's a traumatizing situation. There's a traumatizing effect. So my concern is that we are overlooking those impacted the most by this type of legislation, particularly in the respect that some of the questions that were asked the other day, as far as analysis of other programs available, haven't been done. So we aren't even sure that this is the most effective program that could be utilized. Thank you.
Okay, we got the substitute, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're long overdue for this legislation. I wish it would have been done 10 years ago, so maybe some of the students would learn gun safety earlier at a young age, and maybe we could prevent some of these tragedies we've seen in our schools.
Senator Cluse, do you have a comment? Okay. Yeah, I think I would concur with you, Senator Peterson. You know, I learned gun safety when I was a young man. I took my hunter safety probably as early as you could at that time with my brothers, and I learned a lot there. So I think anytime that you can teach a young person to the dangers of anything is good, you know, from what you should do when there's a fire to gun safety or anything else. So with not seeing any more questions, we will go ahead and vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, nay. It passes. Okay, do you guys want to be recorded? No. Okay. It passes, and 522 will move to the floor. Now we have one more, 588. This is the bill we heard yesterday. You want to just give us a quick overview, and I think Jason might have an amendment to hand out that I'll let you explain the amendment since it's not my amendment. 2688, is that right?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, 2688 was the bill regarding issuance of liquor licenses for farm wineries and producers. It would first direct that a farm winery or producer licensee would be issued a cereal malt beverage retailer's license under the Kansas Cereal Malt Beverage Act if they have met all the statutory requirements for such license. That would allow them to sell cereal malt beverage and beer containing not more than 6% alcohol by volume on the licensed premises. It would also amend statutes directing that a farm winery and producer licensee be issued a club or drinking establishment license, notwithstanding any local zoning or other business regulations in the city or county where the licensed premises is located. This would allow the licensee to sell alcoholic liquor by the drink on the licensed premises. There is an amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead and explain the amendment before I start asking questions.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment occurs on page 2 of the bill. Amendments that were added by the House committee were to clarify that a licensee who holds a license under the Cereal Malt Beverage Act would also be able to hold a license under Alcoholic Liquor Act. There is currently a prohibition on that. You can see on page 2, starting in line 16. I believe the language the House committee added to the statute, however, did not actually achieve the intent, I believe, of the amendment. And so you can see the amendment there would actually exempt a person so that they could be issued a farm winery or producer's license while actually holding a retailer's license under the Cereal Malt Beverage Act.
Okay, questions for Jason? Questions? Okay, we're going to go ahead and work 2688. Is there a motion to adopt the amendment as proposed? Senator Hildebrand, you make the motion?
Yes.
Do I have a second? Senator Cluse, you second? Any questions or comments on the amendment? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay. Passes. Okay, what do we want to do? We're back on the bill as amended. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Jason, just for the record, so allowing the additional spirit as opposed to just beer being tasted or sold at these events. So does this also include, like in Wichita, we do the Wichita River Fest, and then you've got the Hutchinson State Fair. So is it still in a certain perimeter?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that is typically governed by a separate statute on allowing municipalities to designate areas for public consumption, and typically there are temporary permit holders set up for those areas to sell and serve alcoholic beverages. The State Fair, in fact, is actually governed by another statute specific to the State Fair and what it can operate, which is being amended in Senate Bill 2. These are talking about more permanent licensed premises locations.
These are like your farm wineries that want to be able to serve when they're having an event. The husband might drink, whiskey or something different than the wife, and yeah. Does that bring everybody's memory back? Okay, any questions on the bill? We got a motion, we got a second as amended. Do we have, we don't? Okay, do we have a motion to pass this bill out favorably as amended? Do we have a motion? Come on. Senator Cluse makes the motion. Senator Straub seconds. Questions or comments to pass this bill out favorably as amended? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay? It passes. That's an enthusiastic group. Okay, we've got two bills for Monday. We're going to have a hearing on 2710, and then we will work also 351. There's an amendment being drafted, or we would have worked it today. Go ahead, Senator Fasquedo. Senator Fasquedo, we're going to meet at 10 on Monday before our caucuses, and we're going to have a hearing on 2710, and we're also going to work 2710, and then we're also going to have 351 was a bill earlier. It's a poll book bill, election bill. There's amendment on that, and we will work that. Okay?